Hey guys, June here, and today's video is going to be a short one about comparing Tier 80 and Tier 90 augmented armor to try and explain some of the disparities and the differences between them because people don't often understand them very well. First off, let's take a look at some of the actual stat differences between the two sets. First up, obviously the Tier 90 power armor has a higher strength bonus, and the total for the chest and the legs, since we're basically just talking about the augmented gear for the best in slot stuff, is a total of +8 over the Tier 80 set. However, when you account for things like Tier 90 weapons and prayers and overloads and generally best in slot stuff that an average player would be using, this +8 strength bonus only accounts for about a 0.3 to 0.5% increase in your DPS. This bonus is so small that you'd never even be able to notice it in actual performance. One of the benefits of Tier 80 is that the chest and the legs provide a 385 point bonus to your HP. This is slightly counterbalanced by the fact that the Tier 80 armor has a total of 218 less armor value for the chest and legs. Because of these two things, which of these sets that you prefer mostly comes down to what sort of offensive tactics your opponent uses. Just as an example, when you're bomb tanking at Virago, the additional defense that you would get from Tier 90 armor has just as much of a chance of depriving you of extra healing from resonance as it does from reducing your general damage. Because of that, there's no real net gain in having the additional armor value, and so the plus 385 HP on the Tier 80 set is much more beneficial than the extra armor from the Tier 90 set. Alternatively, at places like Araxor, where the boss actually has the potential to miss, the plus 218 armor on Tier 90 set dramatically reduces your damage much more than any benefit you would gain from the additional HP on the Tier 80 set. To be completely honest, the statistical differences between these sets of armors are almost completely negligible from any perspective. Because of that, the rule of thumb for which of the two types of armor you're going to choose for any particular PvM situation is mostly going to be based on what the cost is per hour, and that happens to be one of the most commonly misunderstood things about the differences between Tier 80 and Tier 90. Tier 80 armor consumes divine charges at a uniform rate regardless of what kind of a situation you're using it in. However, Tier 90 armor retains its non-augmented style of degradation. If you aren't familiar with how normal Tier 90 degrades, basically it's based on how many times you're hit within some specific given length of time. If, for example, you're a DPS at Virago and you're taking no damage whatsoever, the armor degrades extremely slowly because it only consumes a charge when you actually deal an attack against Virago. On the other end of the spectrum, however, if you were, for example, to take any of those sets to God Wars Dungeon and be simultaneously under attack from not only the boss itself but also the 3 generals that are with them, the constant rapid hits will drain the charges really quickly, and thus the cost per hour for using those sets of armor is much higher. Because of these differences in the degrade mechanics, using Tier 90 when you're one-on-one against a single opponent can often actually be cheaper than using Tier 80 in the same situation. However, in large group encounters, like for example at Beastmaster where you have things like pets and chargers constantly attacking you, or at the Calphite King where you have to deal with minions and things of that nature, your Tier 90 will degrade so rapidly that you'll find you're spending much more trying to upkeep it. The only real exception to this is Malevolent, the Tier 90 melee armor, which, because of the fact that Rise of the Six is such an easy boss fight and the energies are so easy to come by, they're so inexpensive that pretty much any situation you use it in is cheaper than Torva. Personally, I stick with Tier 80 everywhere since I already had it fully augmented and there's no dramatic stat differences between the two sets, so I didn't go through the effort of assembling any Tier 90 sets. Hopefully this video gives you some of the information that might give you a better idea of where and when it's better to use which of the two different types of armors. This was a fan request video that I know I could throw together pretty quickly, and because of the fact that I'm working overtime this week, I'm not going to have any more substantive video this week, but I'll be back doing that next weekend. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.